Hello and welcome to Inside Cancer Careers, a podcast from the National Cancer Institute where we explore all the different ways people fight cancer and hear their stories. I'm your host, Oliver Bogler from NCI's Center for Cancer Training. Today, we're talking to two members of the NCI's Center for Strategic Scientific Initiatives, which strategizes and coordinates many of NCI's interdisciplinary cancer research programs and has taken an interest in how artificial intelligence will transform cancer research, prevention, and care. Listen through to the end of the show to hear our guests make some interesting recommendations and where we invite you to take your turn. And of course, we're always glad to get your feedback on what you hear and suggestions on what you might like us to cover. The show's email is ncicc@nih.gov. So with us is Dr. Juli Klemm, who directs the Informatics Technology for Cancer Research program and chairs NCI's Artificial Intelligence Working Group, among many other roles at CSSI. Welcome, Julie.
Thanks, Oliver. Great to be here.
Also with us is Dr. Hanlon, who serves as the Acting Deputy Director of the Center for Strategic Scientific Initiatives and provides scientific leadership to the 4D Nucleome Program, NCI's Human Tumor Atlas Network, and several NIH committees and working groups. Welcome, Sean.
Thanks, Oliver. It's super exciting to be here.
So, Julie, let me start with you. As the director of the NCI Informatics Technology for Cancer Research program, the ITCR, could you describe how this program is integrating AI and machine learning tools into cancer research?
Yeah, sure. So this is a program that the NCI has been running for over 10 years to spur the development of novel informatics tools and resources that can be broadly applied across various types of cancer research across the research continuum. And one thing that's really exciting about this program is that the types of technologies that investigators are developing and submit through the program really parallel the advances in cancer research technologies. And so, for the last several years, many of the applications we've received through the ITCR have been incorporating advanced machine learning and deep learning methods. And that has just skyrocketed in the past several years, especially with now the availability of large language models and other types of generative AI. We're really seeing that the majority of applications coming in through the program are leveraging these technologies to advance all kinds of aspects of cancer research. That includes discovery biology, clinical trials, epidemiology, all kinds of computer vision. It really spans the cancer research continuum.
That's really exciting. So some of the applications I think that I'm familiar with are, for example, image analysis in clinical research, looking at MRIs or other kinds of images. I've heard a lot recently about modeling molecules and things. What other examples of how AI is being used can you tell us about?
Yeah, and you've touched upon where I think AI has had the most impact in cancer research is in image analysis, and particularly in whole slide images, where these days slide images are now digitized, and the digitization of these slide images has made it possible to run these large-scale analyses and train large models to find subvisual features that can be correlated with drug response or outcomes or cancer subtyping and so forth. So that really is where the biggest impact has been to date. But now we're also seeing impacts in areas such as clinical informatics, where these large language models can be applied to extract information from, say, unstructured text and find ways to correlate treatments with outcomes, especially in rare cancers where, say, no one institution might have a large amount of data. So natural language processing and text extraction there's been a significant impact on those in that field. But also in applying these technologies to understand basic mechanisms of cancer biology, and for example, understanding, being able to predict types of cancer that are going to be most responsive to certain drug types, or understanding interactions in the tumor microenvironment. So it's really percolating through all aspects of cancer research.
Fascinating. Sean, I mean, just keeping up with AI, which in itself covers a multitude of different things, feels crazy. So being involved in trying to see how the NCI can best employ these kinds of technologies and harness them, it must feel like riding a tiger.
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy there. Yeah, and I was thinking about this. It does sometimes feel like it's it's a hammer in search of a nail, right? And the people are so excited by these technologies, they're trying to apply them to every problem, and so yeah, I think trying to make sure we're applying them where they're the most useful is really important. So one area that I've seen some work in recently that I think is really exciting in the Human Tumor Atlas network, um, which looks at a lot of spatial transcriptomics and spatial proteomics data, is in cell segmentation or other ways to avoid this. This has been a really challenging step in analyzing spatial omics data sets, defining where the individual cells are in the images, and so now people have been applying AI approaches to overcome this real technological analytical challenge. So I think that those types of examples, or even trying to do it in a new way. So now some people are saying, let's not even bother doing this segmentation. Let's see if I can just say, based on just the transcriptomic images, I can define the cell without bothering with the segmentation step. So I think when people have identified, real problems that can't be addressed with other tools, I think that's a great place that AI might be able to really move fields forward.
That sounds really interesting. I want to dig a little bit deeper on that Human Tumor Atlas network work. So the goal then ultimately is to have a sort of high fidelity three-dimensional representation of a tumor and its microenvironment, right? And what's going on there, not just in terms of the cell types, but also in terms of their transcriptional activities.
Yeah, and what's referred to as recurrent cellular neighborhood. So we say, I see a mix of different types of immune cells and cancer cells in this area, and we see those patterns repeat across multiple different patient samples, and that can tell you something. And there's differences. If a tumor, maybe all the immune cells are on the outside of the tumor versus one where you can see the immune cells infiltrating the tumor more, that might be predictive of a different responsiveness to, say, immunotherapies.
Sounds amazing. I mean, it's not an undifferentiated lump. There's a lot going on, and we've known that for a while, but now we're beginning to look into it. So yeah, fantastic, fascinating. So I wonder, NCI both funds research, which may use AI, and it also sees itself as a sort of organizing entity to make tools available, data available, and to organize sort of larger networks like the one we were just talking about. I wonder, what's the balance in your minds, and what are the strategic priorities for NCI, say, in the next 5 years regarding AI? Maybe that's not a fair question, but I asked it anyway.
I mean, part of this is my personal interest, and I feel like that making the data available is a priority. This is something we paid for this data already, and making that usable and accessible to the broader research community really leverages investment and gives other people opportunity to build on findings. Just going back to the Human Tumor Atlas network again, an example of this, we've been trying to get people more access to these, and we've been hosting what we call data jamborees, where we actually bring in groups of people to form small teams and work on projects that are based on reusing the HTAN data sets to try and identify new hypotheses or build new tools. So really getting people hands-on working on this. And I think going back to the bigger picture of priorities, I think engaging with communities and getting a wider set of people to use it, we can get new perspectives, and it's just a way to, I think, democratize access to data, and democratize who's being able to participate in cancer research.
Building on what Sean was saying about really providing some of the foundational resources needed to make use of this technology. I mean, also, I think from NCI perspective, helping define how models can be shared in a way that they can be maximally reused, and so helping define what information you need to make available to describe a model, such as what data was it trained on, how has it been validated, what is its intended use, how should you not use it, and so forth. And so, actually, within the ITCR program, our most recent funding opportunities incorporated guidelines for how to share models so that we can maximize the reuse of these technologies.
Yeah, I mean that sounds like being a good steward of the taxpayers' funds, and also accelerating cancer research, right?
Exactly. So that that we can build on these investments and continue to elaborate on models that are showing promise. I think also, because this technology is evolving so quickly, I think we all know, even in our personal lives, how, AI tools are available, to apply in all aspects of our lives. But I think, especially in healthcare, we need to make sure that they are having the intended consequences. And so the idea of really supporting the evaluation of these models in real world settings, I think, is very important because there is huge potential in advancing aspects of healthcare and clinical decisions. But we need to make sure that it is having the intended consequences, and supporting research to understand that, I think, is also very important.
I'm curious from a career angle as you look across your portfolios and your programs, is it still the domain very much of the computational scientists, or are there also regular biologists like myself, for example, who are daring to venture into this area?
I mean, I think, this gets into, the considerations of, team science and multidisciplinary science. And, especially, just speaking from ITCR, most of the teams developing tools for cancer research, these informatics tools, are interdisciplinary teams of people maybe classically trained in computer science, working closely with oncologists and cancer biologists. Um, However, to your point, Oliver, I think some of these new tools, can be leveraged more directly by individuals who, maybe weren't originally trained in computer science, but can make use of generative AI to extract information from large corpuses of text, to find patterns in data. So, I think that is evolving as well.
I guess I would just echo what Julie was saying, and I think most of the programs that I'm involved in are very transdisciplinary. So it is the computer scientists working with the cancer biologists, the oncologists. Um, so I think one important thing is for people to at least have familiarity with the different fields, and learn the language in order to be able to talk effectively, collaborate effectively with people in different disciplines. And I think that's something that people can start doing as trainees, and I think it would be really valuable for their careers, and something that like you said, we're maybe riding the tiger at this point, but things are changing and you don't know exactly where things are going to end up in 5 years. But those collaborative um, tools and experience and expertise will be valuable, I think, regardless of where we end up in the AI space.
So you recently launched a seminar series, the Cancer AI Conversations, which I think have been very interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about what those are and what the thought behind that series is?
Sean and I, together with another colleague, co-chair the NCI Artificial Intelligence Working Group. And this working group started before the emergence of large language models and generative AI. And when we first started, we had more traditional workshops that NCI organizes, which is planned out for a few months, think carefully about what experts to bring in, carefully outline an agenda, and then have a very in-depth conversation about state of the science. What we found, in the last few years was this field is moving too quickly to use our usual approaches to exploring the state of the science and convening scientists. And we really realized we needed more nimble approaches to explore these emerging areas of AI. And so we had this idea of, rather than having these, maybe a yearly workshop on a topic of interest, we needed to be exploring these areas in more real time. So we came up with this idea of Cancer AI Conversations, which would be, every other month, discussing an emerging topic of AI, and especially as it relates to cancer research, and to invite 3 experts in this field who in the field of interest that might have complementary and different views on the topic, and to really, to share, to give short presentations, but really to have a conversation about the topic and involve the audience in asking questions about the topic. So to really take a more nimble, real-time approach to understanding the impact of different advances in AI on cancer research.
It's almost like a live podcast. What have been some of your favorite conversations in that series so far?
One that has me thinking, a lot of us thinking about next steps, was one of our most recent ones on the role of benchmark data sets in AI, and how having a data set that really is a ground truth information that will help validate models that are aimed at addressing a certain problem. So an example is, let's go back to the example of models for computer vision. To understand if a particular AI model is doing let's say segmentation, like Sean brought up, is segmenting an image correctly, you need to know, well, what is correctness? And so a benchmark data set would be that ground truth gold standard against which you can measure how well is this model performing in appropriately segmenting this image. And so in that case, the ground truth might be, say, a pathologist or a radiologist, depending on the image type. And you say that is ground truth. And if the model performs as well as the pathologist or radiologist in that example, you say it's performing well on the gold standard data set. And so we've been talking about what kinds of gold standard data sets should be made available to drive forward important areas in cancer research that could be advanced with AI.
That sounds really important, though. But I wonder, though, there's this old cliche about garbage in and garbage out. And Sean, I wonder, how is the NCI addressing that challenge, the challenge of imperfect data when you go out into the real world? Let's say you develop a model and you validate it on a gold standard data set, like Julie was saying, but then you go out into this big ugly world and the data are not perfect. How do you tackle that? And is AI part of the solution to that problem?
Well, I mean, interesting. We did have a workshop a couple of years ago now on AI approaches to overcome imperfect data, right? And so it was looking at what are the ways that you could try and address this. So I think the community is exploring different ways, and I think people are aware of these things, of these issues that are related to this. And I think things like supporting benchmarks are important for making sure that those algorithms that are then going out into the real world have been validated on something independent. Because I think, again, we alluded to, this is very fast moving. Lots of people are going in this field. Lots of algorithms are getting published, and so if I'm going to reuse something, how do I know how good it is, right? And so I want to have some of these standard benchmarks or ways of assessing, which are the models, which one should I use for which reason, and then having strong models then hopefully will they'll function well with real world data.
Here on the pod, we've talked in several episodes about cancer health disparities, which is defined as the well-documented uneven outcomes for people across America and the underlying causes, for example, access to healthcare in rural areas. And I wonder, there's been a focus on AI and cancer health disparities, and I wonder how NCI is working to ensure that the AI tools and technologies and data sets that we're talking about are developed and implemented for all Americans.
Yeah, that's a great question, a really important question, Oliver, and it gets to the topic of what's referred to as generalizability in AI, to, ensuring that a model that was developed at one institution, or let's say one hospital, can perform similarly in another setting, and that ends up being really hard because there are so many aspects of the data that a model is trained on that can really impact its performance. You know, the population of patients at a given hospital, the types of technologies they're using to make measurements and so forth. And so I think there's no one answer to that question, but just one area that the NCI is supporting is the idea of what's called federated learning. And this is the idea that you can train an AI model on data from multiple institutions without actually moving the data to a centralized location. And that's particularly important on data that can't be shared for various reasons, whether that's for patient privacy concerns or intellectual property concerns or any number of reasons. And so the idea of federated learning is that rather than moving the data centralized to the model, you can train the model at individual sites and aggregate the training parameters that you gain at each site into a model that represents the average of all of that data it was trained on. And that's one approach that NCI is exploring, and others outside of NCI are exploring this approach as well, to train models that are more representative of data at many sites.
Interesting. So it's a big area. Obviously, collaboration is important. I wonder, Sean, if you could comment on how NCI is collaborating with other government agencies, for example, and external organizations. The Department of Energy, ARPA-H, these entities come to mind. What's sort of the big picture, and where does NCI fit into that picture?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and obviously there's lots of work going on at across the government in this space and outside of the government. There's the NCI, Department of Energy, pilot projects that are one example of this. But maybe one thing I'll talk about is um, Julie and I have been working with colleagues from the Department of Energy and ARPA-H and the FDA in the area of using AI approaches to target undruggable cancer targets. And I think, as most people know, right, there's a Nobel Prize awarded in this space and in this broader space just last year. Um, and there's a lot of work in industry here, but there are types of targets, or there like transcription factors or proteins with large disordered regions, and especially these exist in pediatric cancers and other rare cancers that there's less industry interest in. And so we hosted a workshop over the summer that brought together folks from industry and academia and government to explore ways to help move this field forward. And we are continuing to work, put out a white paper to highlight ways in which we can work across the government to help advance this field.
So, Julie, I think you already touched upon it a little bit in the conversation of federated learning. Obviously, AI is all about data, and since we are trying to improve how cancer is discovered, how it's prevented, how it's treated, patient data is central. And that raises, I think, very valid and reasonable privacy concerns. And I wonder what the stance of the NCI is towards these sort of ethical implications of AI and how we're managing these very reasonable concerns that we all have.
Yeah, it's a very important area, and NCI, takes those privacy concerns very seriously. And I think that's another area I think that I think the government can play a role in helping define how to safely share models that may have been trained on data that includes patient information, and also, by the way, making sure there's the appropriate consents in place to do that training. It turns out that these AI models that are trained on private data, in some cases, someone really clever can reverse engineer those models and identify individuals whose data were
Wow.
in those models in certain cases.
That sounds scary.
And so we have to make sure that we treat these models as protected information. We have these conversations: is a model software, is it data? It's somewhere in between, right?
Yeah.
The model really reflects the data it was trained on, so we have to treat them with as much sort of protection of patient privacy as we would the data it was trained on. And there's some very important research underway, by in government, non-government, and so forth, is how to train models in a way that you can't accidentally leak private information.
Yes, sort of by prompt hacking and this kind of stuff, right?
Right.
Which we do read about in the newspaper. All right, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll talk careers.
Cancer researchers, are you drowning in a sea of scientific papers? Wish there was a way to cut through the noise and find the research that truly matters to you? Look no further than Nancy, the revolutionary new AI-powered app from the National Cancer Institute. Nancy isn't just another research publication app. It's your personal research assistant, designed to understand your unique interests and connect you with the most relevant papers, people, and events in the field. Imagine being able to chat directly with research papers, ask questions, and get instant answers. That's the power of Nancy's AI-driven chat with a paper feature. But Nancy is more than just a conversation starter. It's a networking tool helping you discover new connections and build your professional network. It's a learning tool recommending papers you might not have found on your own and helping you quickly get up to speed in new research areas. Simply declare an interest by bookmarking papers on a topic into a folder, and Nancy helps you stay up to date. Whether you're a seasoned researcher or early in your career, Nancy can help you take your work to the next level. By harnessing the power of AI, Nancy is transforming the way cancer research is done. Download Nancy for iOS today from the Apple App Store. That is NANCI, and experience the future of research for yourself.
All right, we're back. As always, my first question, how did you get started on the path towards science that led you to your current role? Let's start with you, Julie.
Yeah, sure. So when I was an graduate, I got interested in biological research, and was fortunate enough to do undergraduate research. And even as an undergraduate, worked in an X-ray crystallography lab.
Wow.
And so that is a very data-intensive science, and that right off the bat got me interested in data-intensive research. And when I did my PhD, I ended up continuing to do X-ray crystallography, which involved, again, at the time, some of the most data-intensive research there was. I'm old enough that I am pre-human, my training was pre-human genome, pre-next-gen sequencing. So in a way, I've been privileged across my career to watch like incredible advances across biological research.
Cool.
And so one of my, actually my first job out of my postdoc was at a human genome company. This is a company that was actually sequencing the human genome.
Insight, right?
That's right. I worked at Insight Genomics. I think the term bioinformatics didn't even exist at the time, or maybe was new. And so at our company, we were inventing the approaches to analyzing the deluge of data that was being produced through these sequencing methods. And it was such an exciting time to be in that field and to be inventing brand new ways to visualize data and help people work with the data and so forth. And so I've been in data science ever since.
Fascinating. Sean, how about you? What got you started?
Yeah, so as an undergrad, I was always planning on going to medical school. It was a science, a biology degree, and I never really liked the labs because you always knew what the answer was going to be. But then, as soon as I started taking upper level lab classes, I had the experience of like doing something where I didn't know the answer, and I think that really intrigued me and changed my path. And I ended up, going to graduate school, and um, I started graduate school. I worked in yeast, and I started basically just after the yeast genome was published. So that really, I think, has driven my interest in open science and data sharing, because the availability of the sequence genome really changed what you were able to do. You could knock out any gene, you could clone any gene. Within a couple days, you could create a new yeast strain. So it was really uh, amplified the powers of what you were able to do in molecular biology. And then as a postdoc, I went to a genomics lab. And this was earlier genomics. We reused microarrays, which were printed in that we printed ourselves in the basement of the building. But again, that was powered. You could only do that because the yeast genome had been published, so you could design primers to amplify every region of the genome and print them on a glass slide. Um, and Yeah, and I worked in that space. It was sort of the edge of molecular biology and a little bit of bioinformatics, though I basically just used Excel for my analysis because it used to have a pretty small genome. Um, but and I've stayed in sort of in that space, and I think, like Julia, it's just been amazing to see the technological advances from those early day microarrays to whole genome sequencing to now single cell sequencing and spatial transcriptomics. Like the level of detail that we are able to explore has just really grown so much in the last 20 years, and it's been amazing to watch it.
Yeah, I think we're of similar. I may even be a little older than the two of you because these things sound very familiar to me. It's definitely been an exciting few decades. I wonder then how coming out of these very sort of foundational research areas, what drew you to the NCI and to government service?
Yeah, so I was wrapping up my postdoc in 2009. There was a bit of a financial crisis, and there weren't many jobs available for PI type jobs, and so I was exploring what I was going to do, and I ended up applying for the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowship, which I got, and that places you in a government agency, right? And I interviewed at a bunch of different government agencies, and I liked the NCI options the best, and I ended up there as a fellow, and I've been there ever since for the last 15 years. And I would say that the AAAS fellowship is a really wonderful opportunity for people that are interested in exploring government agency work as an opportunity.
Yeah. It's a fantastic fellowship. We'll be sure to drop a link in our show notes. Julie, your path, you already mentioned, you were in academia, you were in industry, now you're in government. How did that path evolve?
Yeah, so after working in industry for family reasons, I ended up relocating, and for a while worked in a consulting company doing consulting work in bioinformatics. And one of our companies supported at one point an NCI program. And that was really my first exposure to working with a government agency. And I have to confess that before that, did not understand what the government did, and really the inner workings of supporting academic science. And so that consulting opportunity was my first interaction with with the NIH directly, and I was really intrigued by the work they were doing and the people I interacted with, and I became very interested in a job with the government, and eventually applied and started working for the NCI now 18 years ago. Started in the Center for Bioinformatics and Information Technology. So again,
Yeah.
in the informatics world.
Yeah, and we've talked about that a few times on the pod. That group, the CBIT group. I wonder also for our listeners. I think maybe they can imagine what your day in the lab was like, or sitting at the computer doing bioinformatic analysis. But what is it like now? How much science do you get to do? Because, you presumably went into discovery science because you had the science itch. Did you scratch it still?
I would say yes, definitely. You know, I I did like being in the lab, and I liked carrying out research. I didn't always have like the best ideas for the big picture science questions to ask, um, but I also liked really interacting with other trainees and mentoring people, and so I I, I think that uh, I still get to do a lot of that now. I get to work with investigators that are part of these like bigger programs, and then I hear about the exciting science they're doing early, right? So that's always fun to be on the cutting edge of what people are doing, and then I also get to help connect people where I see connections between different groups of that are working on similar things, and I get to participate and help organize junior investigator workshops where we're helping support the careers of the future leaders of the cancer research community. And so I get to the you know keep working on those aspects of science that I really enjoyed and was good at, and I also get to see a much bigger breadth of science than I did when I was working in the lab, and I think that's one of the real exciting things to me too.
Yeah, I do think it's that focus versus breadth is really the difference in our day-to-day scientific opportunities. In the lab, you have the opportunity to really dive deep into a focused problem and explore and become a real expert in a domain, in a particular domain. In our jobs, we really have to take the big picture and really look across a field and kind of see where there are advances being made, where there might be gaps. And I think Sean said something that I really see as maybe the most important thing we do is we connect people. Because we have that big picture, we're able to see where there are common challenges or common needs, because we have that big picture, and then we can bring those people together to talk to each other or to foster conversations around these needs and to identify, to move this field of science forward, what is needed, and help to identify those issues and help advance them.
Yeah, that does sound really exciting and fun too. So, Sean, you already mentioned just a moment ago the junior investigator symposia or conferences that you hold. I wonder, in general, how can our listeners who are probably early in their career or maybe not even take advantage of some of the NCI programs and resources if they're developing their own careers in this direction?
So there's an NCI supported junior investigator meeting that happens most Augusts. I think there's some specific programs that are the leaders of that, but it's generally open to other junior investigators. So that's one thing to do. I mentioned the HTAN data jamborees that we host. And those are right specifically targeting people that are not part of HTAN, um, and generally are made up of like 90% are some graduate students, postdocs, or staff scientists that participate in those, and we're always looking to get new people that are interested in spatial biology to participate in that.
That's the
Um,
human. I'm just going to expand the acronym. That's the Human Tumor Atlas Network, right?
yeah, exactly. That's right.
We'll post that as well, and hope that people participate. So, what advice would you give to our listeners, our early career listeners, who are interested in thinking about AI and may not? Some of them may be computational scientists already, some may not, but they're kind of, they're caught up in the enthusiasm for this domain. And what would you say to them? What skills, what areas of expertise should they focus on developing?
Yeah, I think the reason that's such a hard question is we are living through a revolution right now in
Right.
AI, which is very exciting, but that means we're at a time of a lot of change. So I think skills that are going to be future proof and that will always serve, I think, young scientists well, are one, communication skills, being able to communicate clearly about science. And related to that, not being afraid to ask questions and to say, I don't know. I think so. Being inquisitive and humble, I think, is important. Um, Pursuing multidisciplinary opportunities. We talked earlier about computer scientists working with biologists, working with oncologists, and so forth. And that also relates to communication skills. Being able to work in a multidisciplinary team, I think, is also always going to be an important skill. And finally, I think looking for good mentors. Um, Sean and I were talking earlier today with another colleague about sometimes in these fast-moving fields, your people who are older than you might not know the technology as well as younger people. So sometimes finding peer mentors can be very valuable. But mentoring in general, I think, is always very important as especially early in your career, and frankly, throughout your career.
Yeah, I would agree with that heartily. Sean, what advice do you have for us?
Yeah, I think, again, because the field is moving so fast, I think you have to be very thoughtful about what you want to, if you're focusing on an AI related project or applying AI, what are you doing that's unique and that you or your group is specifically set up to make a difference in. What's good for academia, because there is a lot of movement in industry. So you don't want to, be 6 months into a project and you see there's been some major advancement, on the industry side that makes what you're doing irrelevant. So I think you have to be very thoughtful about the types of problems, and then questions that they're trying to address.
So I just noticed that neither of you said things like you should learn how to program in Python or something like that. You've really pointed to the durable skills that make you, I think, a great investigator. Other skills you can pick up as you go along, right? And that's also changing so rapidly. I mean,
Yeah. I was gonna say, yeah, that you don't know. Like, if I say there's that, I'm not sure that it'll be true.
Right.
2 years from now, or even 6 months from now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now it's time for our segment, Your Turn, where we give our listeners a chance to send in a recommendation that they would like to share. If you're listening, then you're invited to take your turn. Send us a tip for a book, a video, a podcast, or a talk, or anything really that you found inspirational or amusing or interesting. You can send those to us at ncicc@nih.gov. Record a voice memo and send it along. We'll play it on an upcoming episode. But I'd like to invite our guests to take their turn. Let's start with you, Julie.
Yeah, two of my favorite books that are in the science realm are both by an author, Thomas Hager. One is called The Demon Under the Microscope, and the other is called Alchemy of Air. And they're both about fundamental advances in science that really change the world. Demon Under the Microscope is about the discovery and advancement of some of the earliest antibiotics. The Alchemy of the Air is about nitrogen fixation, which on the surface does not sound interesting. And I will tell you, it is an absolutely fascinating history. And what I like about these books, a couple of things. One, they really intertwine scientific discovery and history and show the intermingling of the historical time and the advancement of that area of science and how that really impacted history. And second, it's about perseverance in science, and they're both about scientists who really had to overcome some difficulties to push forward something they really believed in. And so I find both books very inspiring and fascinating. And so I recommend both of those books.
Thank you very much. Those two sound really interesting. Sean.
Yeah, I want to recommend the podcast 99% Invisible. It's hosted by Roman Mars, who actually is a science dropout. He was in a genetics PhD program and left to take an unpaid internship at a public radio station, and has built up a public radio show, and then into this podcast that's very popular, and it's focused on the built world and the fact that, the title refers to the fact that you don't recognize most things that are working well in the built world. So it tells some stories behind things that are really valuable, but you might not think about that much. So I think one example that highlights this well is there was an episode on curb cuts. So those spots in the curb that let you roll a suitcase or a stroller along without having to jump up the big curb, and how those originated, and it was through the advocacy of a disabled person, and really wanted to have more access to the world. Yeah.
Sounds really interesting. I'm a podcast addict. I will add it to my playlist. Thank you for that recommendation. I'd like to make a recommendation as well. I'd like to recommend the book Mortality by Christopher Hitchens. I recently reread this remarkable book, and as a longtime admirer of Hitchens's fierce intellect and formidable debating skills, I found it deeply affecting. While I don't share all of his views, his account of facing esophageal cancer really resonated with me. What struck me most was his unflinching examination of what a cancer diagnosis means, while rejecting the usual platitudes about fighting cancer or the notion that suffering somehow makes you stronger. Hitchens is brutally honest about what cancer inevitably takes away from you, even those who survive longer than he did, unfortunately. This isn't a comfortable read, nor conventionally uplifting. I first read it a decade ago after my own cancer diagnosis, and revisiting it recently, I discovered new insights that, while not exactly comforting, strengthened my resolve to continue working against cancer for as long as I can. Well, thank you both for a fantastic conversation. Really enjoyed it, and really appreciate you being here.
Thanks. It was a lot of fun, Oliver.
Thanks, Oliver.
That's all we have time for on today's episode of Inside Cancer Careers. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to our guests. We want to hear from you. Your stories, your ideas, and your feedback are welcome. You can reach us at ncicc@nih.gov. Inside Cancer Careers is a collaboration between NCI's Office of Communications and Public Liaison and the Center for Cancer Training. It is produced by Angela Jones, Astrid Masvar, and Maria Moten. Join us every first and third Thursday of the month wherever you listen. Subscribe so you won't miss an episode. If you have questions about cancer or comments about this podcast, you can email us at nciinfo@nih.gov or call us at 800-422-6237. And please be sure to mention Inside Cancer Careers in your query. We are a production of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, National Institutes of Health, National Cancer Institute. Thanks for listening.